Welcome, fellow travelers of the forgotten roads and wanderers of wilds to the verdant enclave. I'm your host, and sometimes friendly DM. More relevant to today's discussion, I'm also your fellow wanderer and wilderness guide to the Ranger class of 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons. If you're new to the channel, welcome. If you're returning from the last few videos, thank you for continuing on this journey into the Ranger class with me. Last time, we discussed the level 6 features, when the Ranger gained a new terrain for Natural Explorer and a new enemy, or enemies, for Favored Foe. If you want to hear the details, feel free to check out the video. Now yes, another choice is coming for level 7 Rangers. But rather than adding combat damage or attacks, Rangers get new tactical options. Let's dive in. The Beastmaster gains exceptional training, which some of you might point out, not erroneously, is not a choice, since it is only one default option for the Enclave. The most I hear about this is the fact that Rangers' Beast Companions' attacks now count as magical. They aren't magical in point of fact. They simply can now deliver damage through an enemy's resistance or immunity to non-magical damage, as though those enemies were not resistant or immune. The other thing exceptional training imparts is to the Ranger. The Ranger can now use their bonus action, and here's where the choice is, to have their Beast Companion use the dash, disengage, or help actions, as long as the Beast Companion did not already attack. The Hunter Enclave gains a choice between different tactics, but it should be realized that these choices are less versatile than what the Beastmaster gains, or rather less flexible, and also they are more circumstantial. The specific circumstance may or may not frequently occur, but that is why they are referred to as defensive tactics, or rather an action or strategy carefully planned to achieve a specific end. For the Beastmaster, the gained feature is not so much about choosing an ability or a new creature, but being able to command their Beast Companion to do more things simultaneously with the Ranger. I've noticed that people seem to primarily focus on the second part, that the Beast Companion's attacks now count as magical, and that is by no means insignificant, but they usually seem to ignore this first part. The Ranger has new ways of capitalizing on their bonus action without worrying about concentrating on Hunter's Mark. For the cost of their own bonus action, they can gain on their turn the benefits of the help action, and receive advantage on at least one of their attacks. Is your Beast Companion too far away to aid you in combat? You can now use your action to attack twice, your bonus action to order the companion to dash to your side, and on your next turn, use your action to order an attack from your Beast Companion, and get an attack in yourself as well. If you need to get somewhere in a hurry, your Beast Companion and you can both now simultaneously dash, or both simultaneously disengage. Oh, right, and then the Beast Companion's attacks now count as magical, at least as pertains to overcoming resistance and outright immunity to non-magical weapon attacks, creatures such as werewolves. The defensive tactics of the Hunter Enclave present players with a choice between 3 abilities: Escape the Horde, Multi-Attack Defense, and Steel Will. Escape the Horde is primarily useful when dealing with melee enemies who get too close to you, while Multi-Attack Defense applies to either melee or ranged attacks against you. But it does require you to be hit by a creature that has multi-attack, hence the name. Finally, Steel Will applies only to saving throws against the frightened condition. In many ways, exceptional training is directly comparable to the rogue's deservedly famous cunning action feature, except that it switches hide for help, and it gets given to a martial class as a kind of a remote control ability to their weaker counterpart. As a utility function, it is incredibly expansive to the Enclave, which also has access to the formidable spell array, combat styles, and armor classes of the primary ranger class. While the Beastmaster does not gain a choice regarding what feature they will use, what they gain is a constantly repeating choice of how to implement their equivalent to cunning action. There is a slight hindrance here in that the rogue can use their action and then their cunning action to benefit themselves solely, while by contrast, the Beastmaster is using their bonus action to aid the survivability and utility of their companion. So it's a little bit more of a split focus. For those who insist upon only using Hunter's Mark, there's also a possibility of bonus action economy conflict. Reflecting once more that the Ranger class build design needs intent and focus to build well. Up till now, the Beastmaster has had to split their action economy between themselves and their companion. If they're taking too much damage in melee combat, for example, the Ranger had to choose which to disengage first, the companion or the Ranger. Now, however, both can take the disengage action on the same turn, and then move. Both Ranger and companion can now take the dash action on the same turn. Both can now take the help action on the same turn. And remember that help has uses outside of combat, applying to any ability check. The Ranger and the companion can now even take the help action for each other. Steel Will for the Hunter is seemingly fairly useless, as it first requires someone or something to be using fear against the Ranger specifically. On the other hand, it is advantage on a saving throw. Further, the frightened condition targets wisdom, which is the Ranger's utility and spellcasting ability, so conceptually, that ability will already be fairly high, or at least higher than average. On top of which, you can now stack advantage against frightened. This condition specifically imposes disadvantages on ability checks and attack rolls, so long as the source of fear is within line of sight, and blocks any attempt to move closer to the source of fear. For martial classes, disadvantage can be, though not always, problematic. But for melee characters specifically, not being able to go to the source of fear and render it into pulp is downright insidious. If you know for certain, or at least suspect, that fear is going to feature prominently in a campaign, then it may be a helpful thing to have free and constant advantage against it. Multi-attack defense, like the Battlemaster Fighter's parry maneuver, requires an enemy to hit you. However, parry requires it to be a melee attack, while multi-attack defense does not. Parry uses two limited resources, reaction and a superiority die, which means that if the fighter gets hit again, they cannot then use parry. Multi-attack defense uses no resources, which means it's effective against every creature with multi-attack who hits the Ranger with at least one attack. And it is not uncommon to run into creatures with such abilities even at low levels. This ability means that if your Ranger is surrounded, let's say by 3 brown bears, and each one hits at least once on their individual turn, the Ranger has +4 to their armor class for the rest of the bear's individual turns against all of their remaining attacks. It also does not expend spell slots like the wonderful shield spell. But you will find the most benefit by already having a high armor class to begin with, and you may want to invest in having a high constitution. Finally, escape the Horde. When I first read this ability, literally my first thought was, why not just disengage? Having experienced significantly more gameplay since that initial thought, I can understand why someone would want to retain their action rather than disengage. You can attack and move, you can move and administer a health potion to a downed ally, or yourself as the case may be, interact with objects, dash for distance, any manner of things which would have been precluded by taking the disengage action. How useful are any of these options? Well, they are more circumstantial than the Hunter's Prey feature of 3rd level, but it does not necessarily follow that they are useless. Even an archer can make good use of the Escape the Horde tactic, as it is not unknown for enemies to get close to archers, or the multi-attack defense, which works against even ranged attacks, or can protect themselves from disadvantage on attacks with steel will. Obviously, these attacks will be more useful depending on certain situations than others, which is why defensive tactics is less versatile than exceptional training, but they can, and do, offer survival-enhancing options in otherwise difficult moments. So, how have Adrian, the Eldritch Knight fighter archer, and Varen, the Colossus Slayer hunter archer ranger, compared to each other now that they have completed level 4? Let's start by establishing the level 4 baseline damage per hit, 8.25. The fighter made a total of 27 attacks, 3 of which were the longbow, as the fighter admitted to feeling more useful with a sword and shield combination, and he had also received Charm of the Giant Slayer. Of his total 27 attacks, he made 21 hits, for a hit-to-attack ratio of 78%. The fighter used Firebolt 4 times, adding 21 points to his total damage for the level, or 8% of the total. Fog Cloud was used 1 time, and Shield was used 4 times. Action Surge was used to attack 4 separate times, adding 24 points to his total damage for the level, or 10% of the total. Second Wind was used 2 times, to recover a total of 18 hit points over the course of level 4. As mentioned, the fighter also received a 9-day Charm of the Giant Slayer, which turned his sword into a +1 weapon, and dealt an extra 2d6 damage when hitting a giant kind, such as trolls. The fighter's total damage for level 4 was 249 points of damage. 69.07% of this was due solely to weapon damage, including Action Surge. But another 22.49%, 56 points, was added from using the Giant Slayer Charm. 40 points were from the 2d6 against Giant Kind, and 16 points was from the +1 bonus. Magic represented 8% of the total damage for the level. If the fighter's weapon damage alone is taken into account, disregarding the temporary Giant Slayer Charm and spells, but including Action Surge, then the fighter's average damage per hit was 8.19, which is 0.06 below the baseline. Once all the magical effects are added in, however, the fighter's average damage per hit was 11.86, or 3.61 above the baseline. In contrast, the Ranger made 28 attacks, with 21 hits, making the level 4 hit to attack ratio 75%, or 3% below the fighter. The ranger used Long Strider once, Jump 0 times, and cast Hunter's Mark a total of 5 times, adding 59 points of damage, or 20% to the total level damage. Colossus Slayer was brought to play 15 times, adding 61 points, or 21%, to the total level damage. At level 4, the Ranger's total damage rolled was 297, 80.13% of which was due to weapons, including Colossus Slayer. 20% of the total was contributed by Hunter's Mark. With Colossus Slayer alone, the Ranger's average damage per hit was 11.33, which was 3.08 points above the baseline using no magic, and also 3.14 above the fighter using Action Surge, but not magic or Giant Slayer Charm. When the fighter's total is considered, the Ranger's average damage to hit with weapons alone was then 0.53 below the fighter's average damage per hit. But when the Ranger brings Hunter's Mark into consideration, bearing in mind that with weapon damage solely, the Ranger and fighter are almost exactly on par, at least as average damage per hit goes, Hunter's Mark brings their average damage per hit to 14.14, which is 5.89 above the baseline, and 2.28 points above the fighter using Action Surge, Magic, and Charm of the Giant Slayer combined. What's interesting to me here particularly is that the fighter had to get a magic weapon in order to break relatively even with the Ranger, even though they still couldn't push it past 1. They could only manage 0.53 above. But that was not accounting for the Ranger's use of magic. Hunter's Mark was not needed to make the Ranger comparable to the magically enhanced damage of the fighter. The Ranger relied solely on Colossus Slayer to do that. Rather, Hunter's Mark nudged the Ranger ahead, though it did not contribute quite as much to the Ranger's damage as Colossus Slayer did. It is therefore worth pointing out that Colossus Slayer needs no concentration, requires no spell slot, and can be moved more flexibly than Hunter's Mark can, and also without the expense of a bonus action. Though it does not get applied to every single attack as Hunter's Mark does, it is by far a less expensive option and contributes just a little bit more than Hunter's Mark does. Here is the progression so far between the Eldritch Knight fighter and the Colossus Slayer hunter compared to the baseline average damage per hit from levels 1 through 4, with the baseline for level 5 also displayed. The blue line is the baseline. The gray line is the fighter using their Action Surge, spells, and Charm of the Giant Slayer against multiple giant kind, specifically trolls. The orange line is the Ranger using Colossus Slayer and Hunter's Mark. The fighter's average is 3.61 points higher than the baseline, while the Ranger's average is 5.89 points higher. The blue columns now displayed are the Ranger's total damages by level so far, while the orange columns are the totals for the fighter's damage totals by level so far. If you watched the gameplay, I hope you noted that the fighter elected very early in the 4th level to switch to sword and shield combat instead of archery, and reported that he felt as though he was actually doing significantly more, particularly by blocking access to the Ranger and others from the enemy monsters. and therefore the fighter's damage and accuracy was boosted by using the Charm of the Giant Slayer, which turns their sword into a +1 weapon, adding 1 to both attack and damage rolls, and 2d6 to damage against giant kind particularly. So from level 1, Ranger to Fighter, 66 to 44, 140 to 69, 227 to 160, and 297 to 249. I hope you're finding this analysis as interesting as I am, and that you will continue to explore the Ranger class with me, as well as joining Adrian and Baron in the Land of the Hunter. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a great day.